What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with the box office breakdown for Sunday, June 14th, where Steven Spielberg is enjoying a relatively strong opening weekend for Disclosure Day. 44 million domestic and a global tally of 93 million, snapping his cold streak after The Fabelmans and West Side Story struggled to find an audience. As far as my personal taste goes, I was incredibly disappointed by Disclosure Day, but it's always fun discussing the career of the great Steven Spielberg. His name was synonymous with blockbusters and Hall of Fame classics throughout my entire childhood and young adult life. And I've seen Duel and Jaws, Close Encounters, Raiders, E.T., Temple of Doom, Empire of the Sun, Last Crusade, Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, all those movies many, many times over. But because Spielberg's been a professional filmmaker for more than 50 years and making movies for even longer, comparing the opening weekends of his movies can be a little tricky when it comes to how you want to measure inflation, cost of tickets, and the very different release strategies that have been employed over the years. Because back in the 1970s, when Jaws opened initially in 474 theaters, that was considered outrageous. Like, oh my God, like what are you doing open a movie in so many theaters at the same time? Nowadays, a big budget movie will open in about 4,000 theaters. So for our compare and contrast, let's focus on relatively recent history at first. So the two factors to keep in mind when discussing Disclosure Day: first, it only cost $115 million to produce before marketing. It's still a ton of money, but it doesn't need to be a billion-dollar success to justify its existence. But another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of Steven Spielberg movies have very long legs, even if the movie in question might have a relatively modest start, because his diehard fans can keep movies alive for many weeks to come. Personally, I have a hard time imagining this will be the case with a movie as thunderously bad as Disclosure Day, but I have several close friends who love the movie, so it very well might enjoy some longevity. But without completely regurgitating my review, if I had to sum up my main problem with Disclosure Day, apart from the amateur chase scenes and the overly long runtime and the overemphasis on the most dreaded word in the English language, empathy, it would have to be that after months of seeing all the posters and all the trailers proclaiming all will be disclosed, nothing was disclosed, and that was incredibly frustrating. It reminds me a little bit of that classic episode of The Simpsons, the original Treehouse of Horror episode from season 2, episode 3, but Lisa's reading the Edgar Allan Poe poem, The Raven, and it gets to a point where the protagonist of the poem opens up a door and sees nothing, and Bart tells Lisa, "You know what would have been more frightening than nothing?" She's like, "What?" And he goes, "Anything!"
This better be good.
Darkness there, and nothing more.
Huh?
You know what would have been scarier than nothing? What? Anything!
And I feel the exact same way about the ending of Disclosure Day. Instead of disclosing nothing, at least disclose something. But getting back to Disclosure Day and how it compares to the rest of Steven Spielberg's career, it's tough to compare to the early classics just because the distribution models were so different back then, where over time they did incredibly well. Like Jaws was the first American movie to gross more than $100 million. It pushed The Godfather out of the number one slot, and it held on to that record for 2 whole years before Star Wars came along and bumped it out of the way. So the movies would open small, but they would play long. And if you adjust for inflation, movies like Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. and Jurassic Park, those movies can still compete very, very easily with the rest of the blockbusters of the modern era. But if you look at Steven Spielberg's career, like in the latter half of his career, basically the last 30 years, here are the biggest opening weekends according to the website The Numbers. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull opened to $100 million back in 2008, and if you're feeling an irresistible urge to projectile vomit, you are not alone. The Lost World Jurassic Park opened to $74 million in 1997, yet another franchise entry that I prefer never to see or discuss ever again. War of the Worlds opened to $64 million in 2005, and Ready Player One opened to $41 million in 2018. And my favorite comment to my negative review for Ready Player One when it was first released was when somebody accused me of not understanding what a blockbuster is, nor how to watch them. I wanted to say, bitch, I saw Star Wars in the theater when I was a baby. Do not condescend to me about blockbusters, ever. But when you look at the opening of Disclosure Day and compare it to Ready Player One and War of the Worlds, 44 million domestic is by no means anything to be ashamed about, but the one stat that might potentially work against it over the long term is its cinema score. The movie got a B. And in general, movies that get a B+ or better tend to play longer in theaters. The higher the cinema score, in general but not always, the longer legs the movie's going to have. And with Toy Story 5 right around the corner, there's a very good chance that Disclosure Day just might get swallowed by people who are looking for like wholesome family entertainment and that sort of thing, because I've been seeing some advanced buzz for Toy Story 5, where a lot of people say it's Pixar's best movie in quite some time, and a movie that might potentially be the highest grossing movie of 2026. But in that so many of Steven Spielberg's movies have played so well over the long term in the past, we really won't know the full story or be able to close the books on Disclosure Day until 4 to 8 weeks from now. But there was another new release in the theater this past week, which barely opened in the top 10 in America, but it opened at number 1 in China. And I tend to look at Chinese numbers with a little bit of skepticism and suspicion, but opening at number 1 in China is always a big headline. But The Furious, which is being distributed by Lionsgate, only opened to $3 million in North America. But keep in mind, the budget was only $20 million. But I suspect that over the long term, The Furious is going to play very well internationally, because you have a Japanese director. It was shot in Thailand. You have a lot of Indonesian actors and choreographers contributing to the fights. And you have a lot of actors from mainland China also in the movie. So basically, anywhere in East Asia, this movie can probably play pretty well. But what also helps is that the movie fucking rocks. When you watch the fight scenes, it's one of those movies where, like, when the scene ends, you're just like, oh, can somebody come along with a broom and sweep my jaw off the floor? I mean, you're just like, oh my God. So rare, especially if you watch a lot of movies where you get that really visceral impact, where you're just stunned and shocked and feeling euphoria and glee and horror. I mean, it is bananas. And a lot of people are going to say, oh, but there's not much of a story. There's just a guy looking for his daughter. That's fine. It's a martial arts movie. They're not trying to adapt Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. It's a man looking for his daughter. He teams up with a man looking for his wife, and they just proceed to beat the shit out of everybody for 2 hours. But in martial arts movies, it's very rare to see a movie that introduces some fresh, new innovations. And I get into this in my review, but I've never seen a movie that employs this fighting style where you basically have like mountains of people where it's not just chaos, it actually does still feel orchestrated. And it's a fascinating movie to watch, especially if you're a student of martial arts movies or Hong Kong action movies or whatever the case might be, going back 50, 60 years. I hope that word of mouth in this movie will be insane. I hope it can generate some ticket sales, because I would love to see a return of martial arts movies to the theater, because I feel like in the era of professional MMA, basically over the last 33 years, we don't get as many martial arts movies in the theater as we once did, like in the 1980s and the 1990s, where just if you wanted to see martial arts, you had to go to the movies or you had to go to a video store and rent something cool. But I suspect that whenever this movie starts playing on digital platforms, it'll absolutely clean up, because I think by the end of 2026, it's going to be on a lot of people's top 10 lists. It'll probably be in my top 10 list, maybe even my top 5 for the year, because it's just so rare to be able to loudly proclaim a new release, a brand new movie, fucking rocks. Usually I'm like, oh, well, this was good and this was bad, or I kind of like this, but I was hoping for more, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, with The Furious, I can unreservedly say the movie whoops much ass and gets my highest possible recommendation. So I'll be rooting for the box office. This is one of those things where I'll be rooting for the box office because I want to see more movies like it. But I suspect that the director and the choreographers and all the actors involved, they will all get a lot more work moving forward. So high five to everybody involved in The Furious. And I'm psyched to see that it's doing well in China, because even if this movie doesn't find the audience it deserves in North America, if it thrives in East Asia, well, then all these filmmakers will go on to get a lot more work. But before I sink my teeth into Rebecca Rubin's article over at Variety, we have to talk about Obsession one more time, because the stories just keep coming out about this movie. I heard a crazy stat about this over the weekend. I think Scott Mendelson pointed this out. Anytime a new movie comes out, if you look at the opening weekend box office, in general but not always, a movie that's performing relatively well will have what's called a 3 times multiple, or perhaps a 3.5 multiple, basically meaning that its final tally will be 3 times its opening weekend, because that's accounting for the second, third, fourth weekend drops. But Obsession now has a 10 times multiple, and apparently it's the first movie to do it outside of Christmas since The Sixth Sense in 1999. That's insane. So it's like you can always look at the budget and the final box office and be blown away by how profitable a movie is, both for the filmmakers involved as well as Focus Features, who wisely picked up this movie for distribution. But the fact is, Obsession's box office just won't go down. This is the 4th weekend in a row where the subsequent box office has been in excess of the first weekend's box office, which is also incredibly rare. Obviously, in the second weekend it went up, third weekend it went up, fourth weekend it went down, but it's like, the movie just will not go away. And of course, we had that big story this past week from the art director on the movie, who was paid $300 a day to work on the movie, but had no back-end participation of any kind. And she felt like it would be nice if Focus Features were to cut a check to all the cast and crew for their hard work in creating this giant success. And if I were in her shoes and I were the art director, of course, yeah, everybody always wants more money. But when you're working on an independent movie, because I have produced some low-budget movies in the world of animation as well as documentaries, and the sad reality is like 97% of independent movies lose money. And when a movie loses money, the producers or the financiers never go to the cast and crew and say, you know what, I lost all my money on this movie. Would you mind giving me back your salary? Like, that never happens. So once in a blue moon, when an independent producer actually, like the dice come up 7 and they find a hit, it's very hard to persuade them that they owe people money if they did not negotiate for it in advance. Like, obviously, if you're a director or if you're a star or something like that, but an art director, my advice to her would have been, for the next 10 or 15 years, you've got the world's greatest calling card where you can say, I was the art director on Obsession, and on my next movie, I want to be the production designer, and I want to continue climbing the ranks. And I would have used it as a calling card and basically like the world's greatest resume builder. And I would have told her, do no harm. Don't talk trash about your fellow filmmakers. Don't talk trash about the distributors who bought the movie. But looking ahead at the next 5 years of low-budget horror movies, it wouldn't surprise me at all if some members of the cast and crew start trying to negotiate for a potential piece of the action in the event of a big sale or big box office or whatever the case might be. I won't say that they'll get it, because usually when you're making a low-budget horror movie, nobody has any leverage of any kind. Everybody's desperate for work. Everybody's desperate for money. But if you're incredibly talented and you're in demand and you've got more offers than you can accept, of course, and then you can try to demand whatever you like. It's always great to have options, because when you have options, you have leverage and you can reach out to their testicles and give them a little squeeze. But if you're an out-of-work art director working on a low-budget independent movie for $750,000, yeah, it's highly unlikely you're going to get a piece of the action. That's just the way of the world. But she's like in her mid-20s. And once again, I would have told her to play the long game, because if you work on one big independent movie, well, then you can work on the next big independent movie. Usually directors will take their loyal cast and crew from movie to movie, and as they level up, you level up. Look at Christopher Nolan. He works with the same people over and over and over again. And once upon a time, he was making low-budget independent movies. But maybe at this point, it's time to switch over to the official analysis over at Variety with an article written by Rebecca Rubin titled Box Office. Spielberg's Disclosure Day opens to $44 million. Masters of the Universe suffers 71% drop. Obsession keeps shattering expectations. Disclosure Day, a sci-fi adventure from Steven Spielberg, opened to #1 at the domestic box office with $44 million from 3,824 theaters. Those ticket sales were above estimates of $35 million, though below the $50 million that rival studios argue a film of this scale should earn in its debut to justify its price tag. Disclosure Day, one of the summer's biggest gambles, cost $115 million to produce and $80 million to market. Since the theaters keep about half of revenues, Disclosure Day needs to earn about $300 million globally to be profitable. Critics' reviews are solid, 81% on Rotten Tomatoes, while audiences' scores are mixed, a B grade on CinemaScore exit poll, so it's unclear how ticket sales for Disclosure Day will hold in the coming weeks. However, Spielberg's movies tend to have significant box office staying power. His prior summer blockbuster, 2018's Ready Player One, opened to $41 million and ended with $137 million domestically and $607 million worldwide. Internationally, Disclosure Day has generated $48.9 million from 73 markets for a global start of $92.9 million. There's no straight line between reviews, word of mouth, and box office, and no one knows exactly where this is going, says David A. Gross, who publishes the box office newsletter Franchiserie. He notes that overseas audiences could contribute to the film's theatrical longevity. Sci-fi thrillers do well abroad. These are visual stories that everyone understands. Spielberg, who helped create the summer box office season with Jaws in 1975, is the most commercial director of all time thanks to escapist blockbusters like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Jurassic Park, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Spielberg has more recently favored prestige fare like The Post, West Side Story, and The Fabelmans, which scored hordes of Oscar nominations but didn't successfully introduce the prolific filmmaker to younger generations. That was reflected in the turnout for Disclosure Day, where 60% of moviegoers were 35 or older. Initial crowds were eager to watch the twisty conspiracy thriller on the biggest and brightest screens, with premium large formats representing a mighty 48% of grosses. Disclosure Day stars Emily Blunt and Josh O'Connor as a meteorologist and a cybersecurity expert who join forces to expose the government's cover-up of extraterrestrial life. Spielberg is one of the preeminent filmmakers in the history of this industry, says Universal's domestic distribution president Jim Orr, while noting that audiences cited directors. Their main reason for wanting to see the film is the kind of movie that audiences are going to be talking about for quite some time. It's a theatrical event that makes you think. And just to add a little snide comment of my own, I totally agree with Jim Orr that people will be talking about it for quite some time, and it'll also make them think. But it's going to make a lot of people think, Steven Spielberg, please don't make any more science fiction movies unless you're going to try something new. Like, stop trying to retread terrain that you already explored in superior fashion with Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. decades ago. But back to the article. Elsewhere at the domestic box office, last weekend's newcomers, Paramount's horror parody Scary Movie and Amazon MGM's toy adaptation Masters of the Universe, each suffered a brutal 70% decline in their sophomore outings. Scary Movie slid to third place with $14.5 million from 3,504 theaters, bringing domestic ticket sales to $84.5 million and $173.1 million worldwide. Despite the steep drop in attendance, Scary Movie cost just $30 million to produce and is poised to reap financial rewards. Masters of the Universe, on the other hand, will have a harder time justifying its mega price tag. The Sword and Planet Adventure dropped to number 5 with $8.6 million from 3,677 locations. It has earned just $45.7 million in North America and $84 million worldwide. And against a nearly $200 million production budget, will leave theaters as one of the year's biggest bombs. Masters of the Universe is based on the 80s Mattel toy and cartoon, and this kind of turnout suggests the movie isn't expanding beyond the core fan base of older males. And let me pause for a quick comment about my beloved Masters of the Universe, a toy line that I played with religiously from like age 6 to 9. It's okay to let franchises just fade into the past. We can still enjoy them and learn from them, but it's a little bit like right now if somebody were to say, we're bringing back Flash Gordon, I'd be like, I don't know. Like, even in 1980, they struggled to bring back Flash Gordon. Like, Flash Gordon was a big phenomenon like in the 30s and early 40s, but sometimes a pop culture phenomenon is just of that era, and you just let it be of that era, and then you learn from it and take inspiration from it. You know, Star Wars took inspiration from many sources, and it became Star Wars. But like, you don't see a lot of people clamoring for like a return of Tarzan to the big screen. Like, we need to bring back all the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, which I think I've got one of them around here. I can't find it. But anyway, I read the first book. My dad was obsessed with the Tarzan novels back in the day. But it's like Tarzan was awesome in the early 1900s, but you just let Tarzan be of that era and you can take inspiration from it and try to build something new. I would recommend to Amazon MGM, stop investing $200 million in trying to resurrect like Gen X IP and maybe distribute that $200 million between like 20 great writers trying to come up with the next Masters of the Universe, the next great space opera, Sword and Planet fantasy adventure story, whatever the case might be, but come up with some new shit. IP's never going to go away, and obviously Toy Story 5 and Spider-Man Brand New Day are going to do huge numbers this summer, but I feel like young audiences are sending a very clear and open signal. We want some new stuff that we can call our own. Meanwhile, Obsession continues to do unprecedented business with $19 million in its fifth weekend of release, a 25% decline, and enough for second place on box office charts. What's more impressive is that the breakout horror hit, directed by YouTube creator Curry Barker, has had 4 consecutive weekends that were larger than its already impressive $17 million debut. Now the low-budget Obsession has generated $188.3 million in North America and $265 million globally. It's the highest-grossing release of all time for its distributor, Focus Features. Yeah, that's fucking insane. Like, put it this way. For a movie made for $750,000, if it had just had the opening weekend of $17 million and nothing else, that would still be considered a Hall of Fame smash success for a low-budget movie. And anyway, these are numbers. They're almost kind of getting difficult to process just how impressive the success story of Obsession might be. But poor Curry Barker, whatever he does next, people are going to be like, big disappointment. He has such a tough act. I think I heard a rumor that he's going to do a reboot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I would say, dude, keep doing original stuff. Obviously, you're good at it, but we shall see what the future holds. But obviously, this is a good problem to have. A big, giant success is always a great problem to have as a young filmmaker. Backrooms, another horror sensation, captured the number 4 spot with $12 million from 3,404 venues in its third weekend. The film, from another YouTube phenom, Kane Parsons, has grossed $160 million domestically and roughly $250 million worldwide to date. After less than 2 weekends on the big screen, Backrooms overtook Marty Supreme, $191 million, as A24's highest-grossing movie of all time. And just to reiterate my point about Masters of the Universe, there you have a $200 million movie trying to resurrect a Gen X property from more than 40 years ago. Backrooms is like a Gen Alpha / Gen Z IP that's doing extremely well at 1/20th the cost. So, yeah, down with the old IP, long live the new IP. And speaking of old IP, back to the article. Meanwhile, Disney's Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu keeps faltering at the box office. In sixth place, the film brought in $4.7 million from 2,680 venues in its fourth outing. The space adventure, a spin-off of the popular Disney Plus series The Mandalorian, is shaping up as a major theatrical dud with $165 million domestically and $315 million globally against a $165 million price tag. Now, we could talk ad nauseum about how Disney has run the brand of Star Wars into the ground, but I think we're seeing the end of a trend where in 2014 we had Guardians of the Galaxy, and I think in 2017 we had Thor Ragnarok, where between those two movies, suddenly like space opera movies, like, sci-fi movies in space with like rock and roll soundtracks, got very cool, very hot, and everybody's like, all right, let's make another movie like those. But now we've just had one too many that all kind of look the same and feel the same. Like if you were to throw into a blender Predator, Badlands, Masters of the Universe, The Mandalorian, and Grogu, and probably, I have not seen it yet, but probably the upcoming Supergirl, they all kind of look alike, feel alike, and I just think people are getting tired of that format. In 2014 and 2017, it felt very fresh, very new, it just fucking ruled. But all trends draw to a close, so let's chill on the space operas and try to come up with some fresh approaches to science fiction. Another new release, the disaster parody Stop That Train, opened in ninth place with $2 million from 1,161 locations. The well-reviewed comedy from director Adam Shankman follows two stewardesses who have to save the day when a huge storm threatens to derail a high-speed train. RuPaul leads the cast alongside several Drag Race favorites like Ginger Minj and Jujubee. We are very pleased with the enthusiastic response from both fans of RuPaul's Drag Race and newcomers alike. The film's distributor Bleecker Street said in a statement, "We have had multiple sellouts in major markets and look forward to continuing to take audiences nationwide on this hilarious ride." Right now, the domestic box office is 13.2% ahead of last year, according to Rentrack. What's more notable is the summer season is pacing just 3% behind 2019, the last pre-pandemic year, when Avengers Endgame was cementing all kinds of records. Next weekend's Toy Story 5, which should be the summer's first tentpole to launch above $100 million, could help close that gap. Then the Despicable Me spin-off Minions and Monsters, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, and Spider-Man Brand New Day look to keep auditoriums bustling through the rest of popcorn season. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but there's a chance that the summer movie season of 2026 might surpass the summer of 2019, which means we might finally get to a point where the official trades, Variety, Deadline, Hollywood Reporter, will stop constantly making comparisons to pre-pandemic times. Like, it's 2026, stop talking about the pandemic, we're in a whole new era. But of those new movies that are coming, I think that Supergirl is going to underperform. Every Despicable Me movie ends up grossing around like $1 billion. I've never seen one of them. Maybe I should start seeing those fucking movies. They seem wildly popular, but those movies tend to do very well. The Odyssey, I really have no idea. Will it do 500 million? Like, will it perform like Dunkirk, or will it perform like The Dark Knight? There's no way that I'm going to know. I think at a minimum, the opening weekend for The Odyssey is going to be fucking explosive. But then, depending upon how people feel about it, that might dictate its long-term returns. But obviously, it's going to be the most hotly debated movie of the summer, no matter what angle you're approaching it from. And Spider-Man Brand New Day, I mean, apart from like Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2, every time they make a Spider-Man movie, it's just an excuse to print money. I have a feeling that movie, either Brand New Day or Toy Story 5, will probably be the highest grossing movie of 2026. And I'm well aware that Doomsday is coming. I don't think Doomsday is going to be more popular than Brand New Day. I could be wrong, but look at No Way Home compared to some recent Marvel movies. It's like, ugh. Yeah, Spidey will always be popular. I mean, I showed the trailer to Brand New Day to my 4-year-old nephew, and he got to the end of it, and he looked at me and just goes, "Again." I was like, all right, that's a good sign if a 4-year-old wants to watch the trailer again. But coming up this week, I've got Leviticus tickets on Wednesday, and The Death of Robin Hood on Thursday. I'm trying to find some part of my cold, dead heart that could bring itself to see Toy Story 5 in the theater. I have absolutely zero interest whatsoever. Like, I can't pretend to be excited for or anticipate it. And I try to always review movies that at least some part of me is looking forward to seeing. I might have to see Toy Story 5 in a state of chemically altered consciousness just to enjoy the ride and also have some context for box office, but I don't think I can review Toy Story 5. But who knows, I might change my mind later this week. But at a minimum, I've got 2 movies to look forward to. In the following week, I've got Supergirl and Jackass, so yeah, plenty of new releases on the horizon, as well as 50th anniversary reviews for The Omen, and a 75th anniversary review for Strangers on a Train, and the season 3 premiere of House of the Dragon. So plenty to discuss in the weeks to come. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. As always, I greatly appreciate you watching my videos and listening to my rants. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell. Hope everybody has a great week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.